One of my favorite features or reasons to video blog is sometimes when I'm trying to get things into words, I get very precise. And that takes a lot of time, and I struggle with the words, and it doesn't have the expression that you can see from me. Double thumbs up, eh? So when I'm doing a video, I can just let it flow, and sometimes I stutter or I stumble, but that's all part of it. That's all part of the performance, as we might say. So I was thinking recently about when I was a lot younger and how sometimes when you're going through experiences day by day, you don't notice such a big shift because it's very incremental. It's only until after months or a year and you look back and you go, wow, you do a recap of what actually happened. So a musical kind of bit of that from my past is when I was a kid, I used to fantasize over getting crazy extreme synthesizers with all these knobs and sliders. Well, I could show you it's my little Korg Nano Control. Back then they didn't have devices like this. It's stuck under other cables, but it's very handy. It's so cute. It was like 50, $60 here. Now they didn't have this sort of thing it's one of those strange occurrences that it's such an obvious idea, but bringing it to market, it doesn't feel the most expensive. It's like plastic, but for what it is with USB controller, it does a nice job. And I think that was part of it, because if it had a standard MIDI controller, it would have to be twice as deep there. But that's why I pair it with this KeyStation 88ES, which doesn't have any knobs. It's simple that way. It's more like a piano. It's not designed for knob tweakers, people from electronic background. When you put the two together like this, hey, it fits nicely. Of course, it wobbles a bit. I might have to tape it more, but use it on and off. It's a good pairing. It's more modular that way. So back to what I was saying, I used to think about my Alesis QS8. It only had 4 sliders, no knobs really. So volume, that was slider 2 actually. And I used to think, wow, if I could get some of these virtual analogs. At the time, the Clavia Nord lead, at the beginning of the virtual analog revolution, if you will, people were like, wow, they want to get the hot sound. It sounds like it's analog, but it's digital, and other, again, words are failing. You listen to the sounds itself, and like any media that is a new form, it tends to appropriate the limitations of what came before finding its sort of own voice. Just like how when we first got TV, before experimenting with all these sorts of camera angles, things you don't have on a stage play, it needed to become comfortable with that. So I very much needed to become comfortable with, okay, I can play the piano notes, and this paradigm is still popular. It hasn't changed in hundreds of years. There's things like the Haken or Haken, is it? Continuum fingerboard. There's a lot of crazy interfaces out there. So as I started to move towards that, I was like, I want knobs, I want sliders, I want a breath controller, I want different kinds of pedals. I want so much to express myself, and that's fantastic. It's great to have that. But I found I was using some things a lot, like a breath controller, for instance. There isn't a really good cheap breath controller, none whatsoever. I've searched the market. There's like a K or a Kai EWI, is that how it's spelled? Let me have a look here. And it's a USB one. It's relatively reasonable. It's like $300. Yeah, it's EWI USB, Wind Instrument, if you look that one up. But one that's just blowing without keys, that's still comparatively expensive. You either have a controller that has a breath control port built in. The higher end Yamaha ones do, but since I think they patented some of the physical modeling technology that goes along with that so well. So again, you're looking at these sorts of things and you're wondering, why haven't more people done something like this? Perhaps there's not so much of a market, and it's a risky thing when you get into it. At first it's a novelty, but other people start copying. To wrap this together with my personal experience, I found that I was using some controllers like the aforementioned breath controller a lot, and others I just wasn't using at all. Like I had 2 really heavy expression pedals, and I wasn't really using them very much. I got some of the same expression in a finer degree with my mouth, blowing, instead of the pressing down the pedal, which it has its charm, but it wasn't so granular that way. and there were some scaling problems, some things I had to work around with the control parameters. It's so crazy obsolete compared to the conveniences we have now inside a modern digital audio workstation. So as I grew older, I began to appreciate things where you don't need to have a lot of physical space in order to control things, but you have a few knobs that can be mapped to different parameters. They're context sensitive. And I learned a lot about usability and workflow that way. I look at things like, is it the Jazz Mutant Lemur? That's incredible. It's still quite expensive, but to multi-touch, I think that is really big. And I think it's incredible how this is my iPod Touch, just a generic background. I should change that. It's incredible how we get relatively cheap devices that are about a couple $100, and they can give you multi-touch at a fraction of the price of what it used to be. And of course, the screens are going to keep getting bigger and the capabilities will increase. There'll be some forms of tactile sensory feedback, I'm certain, in the future, and all the other sorts of things that science fiction extrapolates so wildly about. But meanwhile, while some of these things are likely never to come for many, many years, there are things that are slipping every day, slipping into our lives. And with controllers now, I don't think so much in terms of numbers of knobs as how easily can I get them set up? Because it's a real pain to set up media learn for everything if it doesn't have a predefined template. And so often the templates, I like to go further and customize them. So I've become more of a creature of convenience that way, looking at what's the easiest path with some of this. How can I automate it? Not to automate all of it, because I often like to say, there are some things you'll never be able to automate in your reasonable lifetime. So for a practical concern, it's pretty much not worth wasting your time on. But there are many things your computer can do for you, so you set it to work that way so you can focus on the process of making music or painting a picture. And for me, the joy comes not being obstructed. I like software synthesizers that they either are very easy to use and intuitive, or they can collapse and expand. And I noticed Camel Audio's Alchemy has a simple mode, and it also borrowed a convention of the morph, the 8 morph pads, I think, from the Native Instruments Core, which I'm a big fan of. So Core is also in itself a gateway into the deeper synthesis and sampling engines of the various Native Instruments products which have been developed over a decade. So when you have all this wealth, you can look at it and approach it from these sorts of macro controls, one knob that can control so many different things, or a single thing based on its context. And that's really where I've been thinking of. I was thinking of the phrase, pondering upon it, changes in knobitude. I know it doesn't rhyme with latitude or attitude, but slidertude, that's where it is for me. Just talking out loud and sharing that with you. Perhaps you have a tale of your own that you can relate with me.